by a grant from Mobile Corporation.
Good evening, and welcome to another exciting adventure of Sherlock Holmes on Mystery. I'm Vincent Price. Sherlock Holmes is not only the most admired and best documented detective, it is often being claimed that Hamlet, Robinson Crusoe, and Sherlock Holmes are the most universally known fictional characters. Soon after the first of the adventures appeared in the famous available throughout Europe. In France and Germany, tales of the great detective entertained an early vogue. Germans called these memoirs, which Dr. Watson recorded, Watsonische Chronologie Problem. Today, Conan Doyle's tales of Sherlock Holmes are printed in more than 40 languages, all of the familiar ones, as well as Eskimo, Esperanto, Basuto, Afrikaans, and shorthand. The Japanese edition of The Hound of the Baskervilles quickly became a collector's item. It's not surprising that at last count, Conan Doyle's estate was drawing royalties from 72 different currencies. Adrian Conan Doyle stated with pride that his father's sales of Sherlock Holmes books are second only to the Bible. But the history of Holmes in Russia is one of the best illustrations of his popularity. In 1908, a British minister traveling in Russia wrote to the London Times that the peasants, upon recognizing his British accent, kept repeating, "Sherlock Holmes, Sherlock Holmes," the only English words they knew. Pre-revolutionary army authorities recommended Conan Doyle's stories as good, solid reading for Russian soldiers. Soviet authorities agree with their Tsarist predecessors, and Russian soldiers today are still given Sherlock Holmes to read in volumes emanating from the Red Army Publishing House. You know, as the Victorian period was fast becoming a new mechanical age, Holmes depended solely on his brain and found little use for the new inventions which were bursting upon the scene almost daily. The telegraph and the telephone were new. People were marveling at the gramophone and the typewriter. The bicycle was perfected during the 1870s and 80s and was hailed as an instrument of new freedom. Unfortunately, that new freedom was not shared by everyone, as Holmes is to find out in The Adventures of the Solitary Cyclist. Today, Holmes's appeal continues unabated. The modern office building, which now stands on the supposed site of 221B Baker Street, must maintain a permanent staff to take care of all the mail which still arrives from all corners of the globe addressed to Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Next week, Holmes is called in to investigate a mysterious death, and he uncovers a strange tale of treachery and deceit in the adventure of the Crooked Man. Until then, for Mystery, I'm Vincent Price. Good night. Good evening and welcome to Mystery. I'm Vincent Price. Tonight, The Crooked Man, another engrossing adventure of the incomparable Sherlock Holmes. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, in writing the 56 short stories and 4 novels that make up the Holmes canon, often left out details or skipped whole periods in the detective's life. And while this may have perplexed some readers, it acted as an inspiration to others. There are certain unofficial rules which are obeyed by many who write about Holmes. Some who believe Holmes and Watson to be much more real than their creator never even mention Conan Doyle himself, but maintain a somewhat high-camp intellectual joke by confusing fact and fiction as much as possible. Dorothy L. Sayers, herself an avowed member of the Holmesian cult, announced that this exercise must be played as solemnly as a country cricket match of Lord's. The slightest touch of extravagance or burlesque ruins the atmosphere. Nowhere are there more societies devoted to Holmes than in the United States. It was here in 1934 that the very first Sherlockian club, the Baker Street Irregulars, was founded in New York City. Originally limited to 60 members, the number of Sherlock Holmes stories, the club still meets, still offers its first toast to Irene Adler, and still publishes papers of Watsonian scholarship, most of which have become collector's items. Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Harry Truman were both secret members while they were in the White House. Perhaps the most famous or infamous member of the Irregulars was Rex Stout. During one meeting, he refused to drink the toast to Dr. Watson's wife. When questioned about this, Stout announced that through careful examination of the original text, he had determined that Watson was actually a woman. Thereafter, so it is said, Stout continued to attend meetings, but always with a bodyguard. The speckled band of Boston, the scandalous bohemians of Akron, the dancing men of Providence. Many of these science societies are open only to men. Not surprisingly, then, was the formation of the all-woman adventuresses of Sherlock Holmes in New York. And what is undoubtedly the most exclusive of all clubs, the female one-member solitary cyclist of Washington, D.C. Hobby, cult, addiction? Well, who can say what motivates these Holmes enthusiasts? The great detective himself said, art in the blood is liable to take the strangest forms. And sometimes when the, shall we say, excesses of Watsonian scholarship create mental gymnastics so brilliant as to seem totally exhausting, some fans might also recall what Holmes called that supreme gift of the artist, the knowledge of when to stop. Even Conan Doyle wrote too, but he said that his favorite parody of his famous character was written by Sir James M. Barrie. Mark Twain's parody is considered one of the worst. Ellery Queen thought Bret Hart's The Stolen Cigar Case the best, and O. Henry wrote about Shamrock Jones. T.S. Eliot patterned Macavity, one of his famous cats, on Holmes's arch-villain, Professor Moriarty. Holmes has also lent his image to an unbelievably varied array of products, beginning with a supposed endorsement of Beecham's Pills in 1894. And then there quickly followed Conan Doyle playing cards, which were available with the purchase of turf cigarettes. And a whole slew of music hall songs were written extolling the detective's glories. London Transport named one of its trains the Sherlock Holmes Special, and the Northumberland Arms pub was rechristened the Sherlock Holmes. But nothing, as far as I'm concerned, matches the charm of the present-day Baker Street establishment, the My Dear Watson coffee shop. Tonight's story finds Holmes in his Baker Street lodging at Christmas time. But a scandalous theft is about to disturb his solitude, and he begins to unravel the adventure of the Blue Carbuncle. Why all this devotion to a man who was intensely prejudiced, imperious, often bad-tempered, thoughtless with people who might look to him for a little kindness, capable of an unmerited snub, grossly self-indulgent, arrogant, self-opinionated, and decidedly touchy about trivialities? Well, just because he is Sherlock Holmes, and in our imaginations we are Sherlock Holmes. And while many of us would tend to envy the inhabitants of the settled and serene Victorian age, Stout suggests that Holmes has fascinated us for the past century because Holmes is the embodiment of man's dearest and most stubborn conceit, that he is a reasoning animal. Stout writes, our aspiration to put our reason in control of our instincts and emotions is so deep and intense that we constantly pretend we are doing so. We almost never are, but Sherlock Holmes always is. Until next week, then, when we'll begin a new series on mystery, I'm Vincent Price. Good night.
Mystery is made possible by a grant from Mobile Corporation.